Hey everyone, this is Sharon Koifman, the Progressive Zionist. While I'm always excited to explain how the Jewish and Zionist communities can change so many mindsets in a short time, I realized early on that I was actually skipping a few steps. For many people, the idea of changing the minds of millions and millions of people might sound foreign and borderline delusional, especially when we talk about doing it quickly. With so many initial objections in my courses, I quickly realized that before I discuss strategies, I must get people to believe that it is actually possible. Because let's face it, a good strategy is useless if people think you're out to lunch. And of course, if you don't think I'm out to lunch and my videos are actually making you feel that we can change the way people see Israel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me get the message out there. So let's get down to business. When I first started searching for the solutions to the PR problem in Israel, I dove into tons of books about marketing, behavior psychology, and behavior economics. One book that really inspired me was The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's first book. It argued that at a certain point, an idea, a trend, or social behavior crosses this almost magical threshold and starts spreading rapidly, almost like a virus. And it doesn't require massive resources or prolonged effort. Instead, it depends on a specific step that triggers us to want to spread this product or idea. Kind of how we suddenly like to share great cat videos. To be fair, in order to create a world-scale mind-changing effect, especially with a huge opposition, it does require a couple of years of groundwork instead of the usual few months. And it could feel like a series of small, exhausting steps until that massive spread kicks in. The groundwork effort starts with creating what Malcolm calls sticky messages that would capture everyone's attention. In the previous video, The Science Behind Why Israel is Losing the PR War, I described the sticky messages of the anti-Israel marketing machine as easy, familiar, emotionally driven terms and ideas that are easy to repeat. And then it is all about recruiting people to deliver this message. In the book, Gladwell gets specific about key players, including connectors, who are people that just seem to know everyone, and the mavens, the people who just seem to know everything. And of course, there are the salespeople who are pushing your product or idea to go viral. The reality is that that book was written during the internet's infancy, and I can only imagine that today Gladwell would have swapped out those players for influencers, investors, and marketers, or at least add them as part of the package. But whether it is 25 years ago or today, the conclusion would remain the same, that the tipping point, as in the specific period when your ideas start spreading quickly, is not exactly within our control. What is within our control is building the infrastructure to set the stage for that tipping point. Also, equal as important, it's once you get that tipping point, knowing how to keep pushing it forward. Now, it turns out that mavens, connectors, and salespeople aren't the only outdated concepts in the conversation. And to my excitement, Malcolm Gladwell recently released a sequel that adds a lot more content and a few fresh new case studies, which makes this book kind of feels like upgrading from dial-up to high-speed internet. And for all of you staring at the screen looking all confused because you never heard the sound of thank you for making me feel old. The first big aha moment in this sequel, which by the way is called The Revenge of the Tipping Point, was the research showing that for an idea to spread quickly, you need about 25% of your target population to accept it. This 25% threshold is a point at which a minority's viewpoint becomes so influential that it catches up on the rest of society. Sort of like how one of your 4 friends suddenly decide that kale is the next big thing. And now everyone is pretending to love it. Ugh. Now, while I'm not sure how precise the number is, it is encouraging to hear that if you somehow manage to reach about 20% of your market, you might be doing better than you think. You could be just a few percentage points away from your ideas spreading super fast, like a cat video going viral on the internet. Yet what truly blew my mind in the book were the 2 relevant case studies. One of them surprisingly relates to Jewish activism. And I say surprisingly because all this behavior psychology and behavior economic books that I used to put together my strategies were mostly aimed at marketers, which I then translated to this activism talk. But in this case, Gladwell tackles social issues related to activism. To be more specific, one chapter is about Holocaust education and the other is about gay marriage. All topics that truly bring people together. So let's start with the Holocaust, which is a subject that hits deep for me. I'm a descendant of many Holocaust survivors in my family. My dad's two older siblings died in the death march when they were kids, and my uncle, who was in the wound at the time, survived, which probably makes him one of the youngest survivors in the world. I didn't exactly count them, but approximately half of my family perished in the genocide. So the discussion around the Holocaust is crucial and sensitive in my world. At the same time, as a pro-Israel activist, I felt a slight frustration throughout the years, maybe even a bit of jealousy. There's so much of our energy and investment has gone into Holocaust education, learning about people who perished 80 years ago, while we almost completely ignored the modern history of Israel, which cost us lives today. But don't be confused. I'm really proud, and I try never to take it for granted what a miracle it was that we got Holocaust education so right. These days, the majority of North American schools teach the Holocaust. Some states have even made it a law. Many countries do not permit denial of the Holocaust. And the most important part is that anyone who actually denies that 6 million Jews were killed looks like a complete fool. What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
And yes, we should never stop striving for more, considering all the hate that we're experiencing these days. But we have done a really, really good job, and that should be noticed. As an activist, I've always wondered how we accomplished this, and I imagined that from day one when Jews returned from the concentration camps, they saw the urgency to let the world know. Of course, the North American Jews who saw their brothers and sisters coming back skin and bones understood the importance of coming to their aid. I even imagined that non-Jews across the world totally got it. The elimination of 2/3 of European Jews was so drastic that when they were approached for the proposal to teach this everywhere, most people were immediately on board. I really thought that when it came to the Holocaust education, Jews had their shit together and made it a success. And I always wondered, why can't we do the same thing for Israeli activism? But it turns out I was wrong. For a long time, Holocaust education was nearly non-existent in the Western world. Say what? Jews did not do much about Holocaust education for the first 30 years after the war. There were a few activists like Elie Wiesel and Simon Wiesenthal who pushed the agenda almost from day one, but most didn't. Strangely enough, our Babis and Zaidis were ashamed of what had happened to them and hid their concentration camp tattoos. They did what Jews do best. They wanted to move on and build a life, a career, and a family. That was their activism, that was their revenge. They were not interested in talking about the incredibly sad past, and just like Jews today, they kind of neglected the importance of influencing and educating others. One of the examples in the book is when General Eisenhower, after the war, saw the concentration camp tattoos on the arm of his interpreter, who was obviously a survivor. And the question that came to his mind was whether that tattoo was actually painful. It was pretty shocking for the interpreter that the future president was concerned with the pain of the tattoo and not the far more extreme pain that it symbolized. I mean, he might as well ask if the tattoo came with a complimentary bagel. But the reality was that people did not know or appreciate the severity of the Holocaust at the time. Gladwell makes the case that until the late 70s, the Holocaust, as we understand it today, was not common knowledge. Most certainly, the word Holocaust was not a solidified term that these atrocities had. People more often refer to it as the Shoah or the final solution. Also, it wasn't until the late 70s, 80s, and 90s that Holocaust museums began to open across North America. And at the same time, it was finally where the real push for schools to teach about genocide. Before that, there was just one underwhelming museum in Los Angeles and a few advocates. In a strange way, this revelation that Jews didn't really get it right for the first 30 years was somewhat of a relief for me. The knowledge that this successful world campaign, which we might take for granted today, didn't start well, is eye-opening. For a long time, we were just as passive about Holocaust activism as we are today about Israel activism. All of this gives me hope that getting the majority of people to understand the indigenous connection Jews have to Israel could be just a few years away. Maybe even faster if we throw in some free bagels. But what the book reveals next should give anyone even more enthusiasm. The most interesting part is not just that Lil moved until the late 70s, but also what happened during that time to get the ball rolling. Based on Gladwell's book, the big event was two NBC producers named Paul Klein and Erwin Siegelstein who passed by a book called The Holocaust and decided that it was the right time to make a miniseries on the topic. The great thing is that back then, the only screen people had was a TV, and there were very few channels, which sounds like a nightmare for my kids. So this mini-series attracted around 120 million viewers and made huge impact on how people across the world viewed the Holocaust. Yes, I am saying that one TV mini-series truly changed the game. Before this miniseries, there was only one Holocaust museum established in 1961 called the Murderers Memorial Museum, which eventually became the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum once the word became solidified because of this miniseries. The Holocaust was established as the official name for those atrocities only in the 80s, and during that time, 6 more museums popped up, including the Montreal Museum, which opened a year after the miniseries. Yes, there were a few other events that brought the atrocities to light before that, like the Nuremberg trials, or the Adolf Eichmann's trial in Israel that was broadcast globally, and books like The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank and The Night by Elie Wiesel that were gaining prominence. But surprisingly, for the most part, people in the 50s and 60s knew about the atrocities as much as people today know about the Sudan or Uyghur genocide. And let's be honest, that's not a lot. And like I showed, the term Holocaust wasn't even solidified until that time. In Germany, there was an even bigger impact. After the series, the German government actually changed the status of limitation, or should I say removed any limit on how long you can pursue Nazis in general. And they really opened the discourse about what their parents and grandparents had done. Also, the concentration camps became protected and well-funded institutions. Now, I don't know if it was just the miniseries or a combination of events that happened in the late 70s and early 80s, but one of the most important impacts of that time was that our community became confident and focused. We narrowed our resources and investments toward making sure that the world knew about these atrocities. The focus and drive kept our eye on the ball, continuously adjusting and improving our message to keep that ball rolling and even accelerating it. Eventually, with time, every Jew became an ambassador for the 6 million people who perished. Our maintained focus after the tipping point, or the snowball effect, was just as crucial as the building blocks to achieve the tipping point. Obviously, I was not really alive during the time, so I've never experienced the impact of the Holocaust miniseries. However, I did get a chance to see firsthand how a movie can create this amazing momentum when I watched Hotel Rwanda. Now, Hotel Rwanda is not only, in my opinion, one of the best movies ever made, but it's also, for a short time, managed to create a huge impact in terms of Rwandan genocide education. Before this movie, I'd sort of heard of Rwanda, but once it came out, the term Hutus and Tutsis became part of my everyday vocabulary, right up there with avocado toast and Netflix binging. Interestingly enough, my wife got a chance to see the movie a few years later, but the film had so much clout during that period that it inspired her to attend a lecture about the topic. The film opened this chapter of history to the world, and I got to experience the power of media done right to achieve a tipping point. I just wish Congo, Sudan, Somalia, and the Uyghur population could have received the same media love. But it is a bit tough when the anti-Israel marketing machine hijacks all foreign media. Yet even with Rwanda, that did get some momentum, the snowball effect stopped very quickly. It didn't gain enough juice to get advocates to build memorials everywhere and push this information and education in schools. The snowball effect did not go very far, which shows that riding the snowball isn't enough. You must be proactive. This is an idea that I want to explore deeper later in this video because it is a major point. But let's go back to the other chapter in this book that discusses legalizing same-sex marriage. In the early 2000s, things seemed very dear for the gay community. There were many legal setbacks and even some reversals in societal attitudes towards gay marriage, particularly in George W. Bush administration that actively and loudly opposed same-sex marriage. Prominent gay rights activists predicted that it might take 30 to 40 more years to create significant change. But surprisingly, the changes only took 10 years. And the trigger was, drumroll please, Will and Grace.
Say what?
Yes, Will and Grace, the very amusing sitcom about a friendship between a gay man and his female best friend that almost felt like a marriage with a few missing components. Will, the gay friend, played by a straight man, didn't really fit much of the gay stereotypes. He looked and sounded like that guy, the kind even the biggest anti-gay advocate could see themselves having a beer with. That's assuming that wouldn't know that he was actually gay, of course. Combine that with the very beautiful Grace and the more stereotypical gay friend, Jack McFarland, who was still absolutely funny and charismatic. That combination created a very approachable sitcom about the LGBTQ community. For 9 years, it normalized gay relationships and helped people become comfortable with the idea of gay marriage. Now, I don't want to create the assumption that these tipping points only happen through media. The civil rights movement was boosted by a great lady named Rosa Parks, who was arrested for sitting at the front of the bus. The collapse of the communist regime reached its tipping point with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the Me Too movement exploded after the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke. All of these movements, which had a drastic impact on society, happened in a very short period. But of course, they had been brewing for quite a while by people and organizations who were putting together the building blocks. Before Rosa Parks, the NAACP spent years strategically fighting segregation through court battles. There were many early sit-ins, and Rosa Parks herself was trained to be a super activist, not some random old lady that the media liked to portray. The same is true for the Berlin Wall, which was the straw that broke the camel's back after decades of activism in Poland and in East Germany. Also, the West applying ongoing economic pressure. With the Me Too movement, years of women's rights activism and court battles slowly increased awareness, which reached its tipping point with Harvey Weinstein. By the way, just a side lesson based on the Me Too movement, which I consider to be probably the most important Western movement of the 21st century. We can learn that just like a movement can go viral or have a snowball effect, it can also be squashed when the organizers lose focus or the movement gets hijacked. In this case, the movement was hijacked by anti-Semitic leaders like Linda Sarsour, who almost single-handedly destroyed it with her anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetorics. The leadership as a whole was all over the place, advocating for so many causes instead of focusing and trying to improve the messaging for women. Of course, the association with one of America's most famous anti-women, anti-gay rights, and anti-Semitic alleged civil rights advocate, Louis Farrakhan, did not help. And I'm saying alleged, consider that even is civil rights credentials, which is the only redeeming quality that keeps him out of the fascist nationalist category, is questionable, considering that there are many hints suggesting that he was responsible for the killing of Malcolm X. But I digress. The Arab Spring was another movement that was supposed to be a huge game changer in the Middle East, but it was hijacked by the Muslim Brotherhood. So just like societal change can take place very quickly, it can also be killed if the message, goal, or strategy is not properly implemented when it happens. Kind of like trying to cook a creamy pasta while being distracted by cat videos. Did I mention I really like cat videos? Some might argue that October 7th could have been a tipping point as well. But the other side knew how to take advantage of it and squash that opportunity while we remained somewhat unfocused without a clear message and a specific PR strategy. That's one of the crucial lessons that I wanted to share with you today. But I have a few other lessons that we can learn from all the examples that I offered. And let me start with the first. When you read Gladwell's book, you can't help but being impressed by the heroes of that chapter. The two producers named Paul Klein and Erwin Singlestein pushed hard to make the miniseries happen after they just stumbled upon the book. But there are another hero in the book that Malcolm doesn't even mention by name. And no, it's not the executive producer, Herbert Brodkin, who insisted on keeping the word Holocaust as the title so he can solidify that name in history. Sure, he deserves some credit, but the real hero is Gerald Green, whose book actually inspired the two executives to create the miniseries. While Malcolm Gladwell may not mention him by name, it's definitely a big deal. He's like that one friend who showed up at a party with a pizza and nobody remembers to thank him. Before the miniseries Holocaust and after Schindler's List, which by the way also helped spread the message to the world even farther, there were very few people courageous enough to lay down the groundwork before it reached the mainstream. The first person to start popularizing the term Holocaust was Elie Wiesel. Others like Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter, Otto Frank, Roel Hilberg, and the team that built and maintained the LA Holocaust Museum, they were all instrumental in creating the foundation. Even if the atrocities weren't known to everyone back then, it was these individuals who prepared the conditions to make the Holocaust miniseries become such an infectious hit. Of course, as we learn from Hotel Rwanda, the Arab Spring, and the Me Too movement, a tipping point can pay dividends, but this isn't the time to sit back and ride the wave. It's time to roll up your sleeves, get focused, continuously realign and improve our message, and squeeze out all that the wave has to offer. Just a little bit like that schmutz, that final schmutz in the hummus jar that you have to take your finger, grab it. Mwah! It takes effort, it's messy, but it's worth it. It's really yummy. This leads me to my next lesson. We are not too small, under-resourced, or underfunded to achieve PR domination. As Jews, we are naturally great super spreaders. PR is essentially the ability to spread ideas to as many people as possible, and we excel at it. King David, a king of a tiny, struggling population, is more recognized than most kings who literally took over the world. Once we gained momentum in the 80s and 90s, it became hard to find anyone who didn't know the number 6, as in 6 million murdered Jews. The Exodus story is probably one of the most told tales in the world. I can't imagine anyone today who doesn't know who Moses is or what are the 10 Commandments. We achieved that success by ensuring that every Jew, whether the most secular or the most religious, sits around the table once a year eating constipating crackers called matzah and telling the story of Exodus. Just imagine if instead of that awful, unreasoned food, we sat around the table, let's say in October 7th, and had fresh pita, hummus, and labneh.
Yummy!
Clearly teaching the Israeli narrative, or at least telling the real history of Israel. The reality is that our challenge in PR has nothing to do with our skill in spreading a message, and it's all about understanding what message we need to spread. So when we reach our tipping point, we won't slow down progress by offering an apologetic message. This brings me to the last and most important lesson, and the reason why we're here. This is to respond to all the people who have given up on winning the PR war, to everyone who doesn't believe it can happen or thinks it would take decades or centuries, to those whose only strategy is simply to vote for one party or another because the party caters to Israel and the Jews, even though there's always a 50% chance that the opposing party will get elected, and that's after we've probably alienated many members of that opposing party. I want to show you here that it is possible to convince the majority of people from different ideologies to jump on the Israeli bandwagon. And of course, I'm doing it by bringing on case studies and demonstrating how many other movements have reached a tipping point and move exceptionally fast. And I truly believe that with the right strategy, messaging, and focus, reclaiming Israel's narrative and creating PR dominance could be achieved within a few years. Yes, within single-digit years. Say what? I can't tell you exactly what will that tipping point be. It could be a mind-blowing Netflix documentary, yet it doesn't have to be media-related. Maybe a very influential member or organization of the left-leaning crowd will wake up one day and realize that they share zero values with the Islamists who are happy to choke babies and throw gay people off roofs. Who knows? Maybe even the Muslim community will wake up and say they've had enough of the Islamists that make them look ridiculous. These are all legitimate directions that could break the cycle and reach the tipping point. In the case of Paul Klein and Erwin Siegelstein, they had a moment when they decided that the world was ready for this type of miniseries. Few things at the time gave them sign that the world was ready. A man by the name Theodore Weiss was starting to push Holocaust education across universities and establish the Holocaust Educational Foundation a year before. In the mid-70s, Jews started to feel empowered when they successfully lobbied Russia to loosen its immigration policies and let hundreds of thousands of Jews be absorbed by US and Israel. And the most triggering was in 1977, a year before, when an application was issued for a Nazi group to march in Skokie, Illinois, a town that was mostly consisted of Holocaust survivors. And while in the end, they did not march in Skokie, the application was approved for Chicago downtown. This was a wake-up call that these issues are not going away just because we want to move on. In general, during the period, it felt that the world was really ready to confront complex and often painful historical narratives. The Jewish community and the world were ready for something big, and the executives of NBC delivered. Just like in 1978, where it seemed that the world was ready, I also believe that in 2025, that the world is ready for an epic change. I see that the Western world, including people on the left, are fed up with emotionally reactive regressives, also known as woke by some, who are hijacking progressive ideology. They are fed up with this hypersensitive, one-agenda, aggressive writers taking over their colleges and streets. It's like a really bad reality show that nobody signed up for. They're also deeply concerned about the growth of extreme right-wing voices that are responding to this movement. While it may not seem that way, this silent majority doesn't like what they see and needs someone to help them define and express that frustration. I also feel that many other movements are starting to get fed up with the anti-Israel marketing machine hijacking their causes. And I do believe that many Arabs and Muslim countries are ready to modernize and no longer want to be held back by this anti-Israel rhetoric, which is camouflaged by supposed care for the Palestinians. Because nothing says care like keeping them tortured for another few centuries by Hamas. Most important, I feel that October 7th, which could have been that massive tipping point, is at least the equivalent of the Nazi march in Illinois that got the Jewish community ready for the next big thing. The world is ready for an epic change. While I can't control what that specific tipping point will be, our community is very much responsible for its infrastructure and what happens after. I hope you're on board and a true believer that it is actually possible to change so many minds in order to make huge, epic change in society. I'm Sharon Koifman, the Progressive Zionist. See you in the next video explaining what we're getting wrong and how we can achieve that be our dominance. See you soon.